Why is there that apathy with regards to pushing for the right to food when you compare with other rights, such as the right to health, such as the right to water, the right to sanitation? You hear things around the right to food, and everybody immediately thinks that if you guarantee other rights, then probably the right to food will be sorted. I usually say that in the right to food movement is the other way around. It is food first. Without a guarantee of the right to food first, several other rights can be guaranteed.
Communities have responded to the pandemic by mobilizing, organizing, educating, and networking. In my view, this is possibly the biggest revival of civic activism in South Africa since the 1980s.
We know colonial influence is still something wholly obvious in the city and something Cape Town can be famous for. It shows itself in our food and social environments within hospitality industries, as well as in the publication houses and organizations, different restaurants and cafes, and of course, the many, many large-scale farms.
The best way of decolonizing our food system starts with breastfeeding.
Yes, we need to work with the communities. We need to encourage them to go back to the traditional food.
And I think at some very deep, undamaged, unconscious level, the display of food in a country in which food's absence is so definitional for people's everyday lives is unconsciously a kind of confession of the deeply unequal dynamics that are operative in the society.
I'm anxious to ask people to help themselves when the system has been designed to exclude so many. So why are those that are excluded, that are suffering food poverty, now using their own agency, using their own, their desire to solve this problem, why are they expected to be then solving that problem? And who does that let off the hook?
All of the most unhealthy, extra processed grain at the front, at the end caps of every shopping aisle, at the largest volume, 5 kilograms of pop, at the most inexpensive price point.
The cheap foods are the unhealthy foods. And I read a quote the other day that said, we should not be asking why is the food so expensive, the healthy foods. We should be asking, why is the unhealthy food so cheap?
But price is an absolute critical component of food and food accessibility. If you think about it, you can buy a burger for cheaper than you can buy a kilo of broccoli.
And hopefully what we've realized now is that what we have is a serious systemic problem. I know that the DTI has referred to it as market failure. It's not market failure. The market's working perfectly. The market is working the way it's supposed to work. This is how a vertically integrated, retail-dominated supply chain works. It extracts value from the other participants in the chain for the benefit of shareholders and the company. It's not a question of market failure. It's a question, a much more fundamental question. It is whether this commodification of food, whether or not a system where profit is the only reason to determine whether or not someone has access to food or not, is actually the kind of system that this country needs. And I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to say no.
And how is it that these multiple systems have come together in a way that stifles a political response to food issues? And I think it is about this kind of complex intersection of culture, of economics, of politics that play out in food.
At first I thought, surely someone is going to have a solution for this. Someone with all the access and capital will work on this problem. And the more I said, the more I realized that no one was going to come up with the solution. All the solutions that I was seeing, at least on all the Zoom calls and Skype calls I was sitting on, was always top down. And no one, to my knowledge, was having the insight and the experience from ground up. No one was on the ground.
So in a nutshell, what I think is one of the biggest problems in our food system is that you've got these high levels of concentration. It means that it hinders participation at different levels. And then you almost it results in this kind of dual food system. The big players that can supply through the supermarket chains, the smaller players that are forced or sort of marginalized to supply through alternative routes to markets, and never being given a chance to build their capabilities to meet some of the requirements to supply, for example, the supermarket chains.
I'd really like to encourage people as much as possible to be able to support small-scale producers, in particular because of the fact that the multiplier effect from their purchases.
We need a lot of mindset change in consumers, where they should be taking back the control and demanding what is healthy.
I think it's a peculiarly African problem, and it's not a problem that started with COVID. This criminalization and overregulation of the informal sector. And I think that an acknowledgement of that would probably help to move the discussion forward.
But even if they could buy the food, all the kota places, the spaza shops, all the food retail in the township was essentially closed. And one of the reasons why most of these places were closed, it was actually an unintended consequence of a top-down systems failure.
I expect them to come up with a bylaw that will finally make us be able to trade.
If you're poor, food is a chore. If you're well off, food is an experience, right? So if my mom is working long hours, she has to catch a cab to come home. So for getting food out is about just sustenance.
Just to have a conversation with communities so that they demand the healthy food.
A lot of nutrient-dense food is getting dumped while we are sitting with rubbish food. No, food that's not rubbish, as Lizanne said. I mean, that's not food.
We all know that our food system is broken. And that means not that there isn't sufficient food in the country, but it really means that we have 80% of vulnerable communities being food insecure.
If you look at national government documents and sort of a lot of the global discourse on these diet-related non-communicable diseases, they're still being called diseases of lifestyle, which then puts it on the person and not on the system. And so there's this kind of medicalized language that's making it feel as if it's your fault if you can't feed your family.
Decolonizing food is about those three things. We allow food sovereignty in the home, choice, and we also, attach value to it.
I struggle with really grasping the idea of decolonization, because for me, just the word speaks to kind of an uncolonizing. So, does it mean we go back to before, the way things were before, which is kind of impossible right now?
And illicit. And so we've got to think about how these existing planning codes kind of reinforce these colonial mentalities of what the food system should be, and slowly or rapidly deconstruct those systems.
If you look around the world today and you look at how young people in many other countries, are moving us forward as far as regenerative organic agriculture is concerned, you'll see that it's small, affordable equipment, things that people can basically do in their own neighborhood. But yet, here in South Africa, our mindset is not there yet.
There's lots of charity and corporate giving and that, but charity doesn't change the system. Charity doesn't change power relations. Charity makes people with money feel good about themselves.
There's been no serious, in my view, collective commitment to a transformed food system that is both nutritious and affordable and serves the needs of all citizens.